Frank Sinatra was seconds away from making the biggest mistake of his career when Dean Martin did something that shocked everyone in the room. What Dean said in that moment saved Frank's life and changed the Rat Pack forever. It was November 12, 1966, at the Copper Room in the Sands Hotel, and Frank Sinatra was about to explode in a way that would have ended everything: his career, his Vegas relationships, and possibly his life. The chairman of the board was standing face to face with Sam Giancana, one of the most dangerous men in America, and Frank's legendary temper was pushing him toward a confrontation that could only end in disaster. The evening had started like dozens of others during the Rat Pack's golden era. Frank, Dean, and Sammy Davis Jr. had finished their show to thunderous applause and were unwinding in Frank's private suite upstairs at the Sands. The room was filled with the usual mix of Hollywood stars, high rollers, and people whose presence suggested connections to Las Vegas's shadowy power structure. Dean Martin was sitting at the piano playing soft background music, while conversations flowed around him. He had learned long ago that in rooms like this, it was better to observe than to participate in discussions that might involve subjects he preferred not to know about. That's when Sam Giancana arrived, uninvited and clearly agitated. Giancana was the boss of the Chicago outfit, one of the most powerful organized crime families in America. His relationship with Frank Sinatra was complicated, profitable, and extremely dangerous. Frank had helped Giancana in various ways over the years, and Giancana had provided Frank with protection and opportunities. But their arrangement was built on mutual respect and carefully maintained boundaries. Tonight, those boundaries were about to be shattered. "Frank," Giancana said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made everyone in the room stop talking, "we need to discuss your friend in the White House." Dean's hands paused on the piano keys. Frank's friend in the White House was President John F. Kennedy, and Dean knew that any conversation involving Kennedy, Sinatra, and Sam Giancana was likely to be dangerous for everyone involved. Frank's relationship with Kennedy had become a liability for everyone concerned. The president had used Frank's connections during the 1960 campaign, but now that Kennedy was in office, his administration was actively investigating organized crime. Frank was caught in the middle. News too connected to the mob to be completely trusted by the White House, too visible to be completely trusted by men like Giancana. "Sam, this isn't the time or place," Frank said, his voice already showing the edge that those who knew him recognized as a warning. "I think it's exactly the time and place," Giancana replied, moving closer to Frank. "See, I've been hearing things about your friend Jack, things that suggest he's forgotten who helped him win certain states in 1960. The room had gone completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone understood that they were witnessing something that could have catastrophic consequences. Dean continued playing piano, but his attention was completely focused on the conversation between Frank and Giancana. He could see the anger building in Frank's face, could recognize the signs that his friend was approaching the point where his famous temper would override his survival instincts. "Sam, I don't know what you've been hearing, but it's got nothing to do with me," Frank said, his voice rising slightly. "It's got everything to do with you." Giancana shot back, "You're the connection. You're the one who brought us together, and now that your boy is president, he thinks he can forget about the people who put him there." Frank's face was flushing red now, a sure sign that he was losing control. "Jack Kennedy doesn't owe you anything, Sam, and neither do I." Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dean Martin had seen Frank angry before. Mayanus had witnessed his legendary explosions at reporters, studio executives, and anyone else who crossed him. But he had never seen Frank this close to saying something that would get him killed. Sam Giancana's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room could feel the temperature drop. Men like Giancana didn't tolerate disrespect, especially not in front of witnesses. "Frank," Giancana said quietly, "I think you better think real careful about what you just said." "I know exactly what I said," Frank replied, his voice now carrying the full force of his anger. "I said Jack Kennedy doesn't owe you anything. And you know what else? I don't owe you anything either. I've done enough for you people." The phrase "you people" was a mistake that could cost Frank his life. Dean Martin knew it, everyone in the room knew it, and most importantly, Sam Giancana knew it. Giancana took a step toward Frank, and Dean could see two of Giancana's men moving closer. In about 10 seconds, Frank Sinatra was going to either get beaten within an inch of his life or worse. That's when Dean Martin did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He stood up from the piano and walked directly between Frank Sinatra and Sam Giancana. "Gentlemen," Dean said in the same casual tone he used on stage, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Both Frank and Giancana stared at Dean in shock. Dean Martin never inserted himself into confrontations. He was famous for avoiding drama, for staying out of other people's business, for maintaining the cool detachment that had made him a star. "Dean, stay out of this," Frank said, through clenched teeth. "Sam," Dean continued, completely ignoring Frank, "I think what Frank is trying to say is that he's been under a lot of pressure lately. The Kennedy situation has been tough on all of us who were involved in the campaign." Dean's voice was calm, reasonable, and completely without the anger that was radiating from both Frank and Giancana. "See, Frank's been getting heat from both sides," Dean continued. "The White House doesn't want him around anymore because of his other friendships, and his other friends are upset because they think he's choosing sides. Frank's not choosing sides, he's just stuck in the middle of a situation that's bigger than any of us." Giancana was listening, which was more than Dean had dared to hope for. "Sam, you know Frank," Dean continued. "You know he's loyal, you know he honors his commitments, but right now, he's being pulled in directions that are tearing him apart. He's not disrespecting anyone. He's just trying to survive a situation that nobody could have predicted." Dean paused and looked directly at Giancana. "And Frank," Dean said, turning to his friend, "Sam isn't your enemy here. He's dealing with pressures too. When your business is under investigation by the federal government, and someone you've helped is now running that government, you've got a right to be concerned about where loyalties lie." Frank's anger was still visible, but Dean's words were clearly having an effect. For the first time since the conversation began, Frank seemed to be thinking instead of just reacting. "What I'm suggesting," Dean said, addressing both men, "is that maybe this conversation should happen when everyone's had a chance to cool down. Frank, you've got 3 more shows this week. Sam, you've got business to handle. Maybe we all take a step back and remember that we're friends here, not enemies." The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then Sam Giancana did something that surprised everyone. He smiled. "Dean Martin," Giancana said, "I always heard you were the smartest guy in the group. I guess they were right." Giancana turned to Frank. "Frank, your friend here makes sense. We're all dealing with complicated situations. Maybe we should talk about this when we're all thinking more clearly." Frank nodded slowly, his anger finally beginning to subside. Giancana headed toward the door, followed by his men, but before he left, he turned back to Dean. "Dean, I appreciate you speaking up. That took guts." After Giancana left, the room remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Frank walked over to Dean and put his hand on his shoulder. "Dino, "What the hell was that?" "That," Dean replied, "was me keeping you from getting yourself killed." Frank stared at his friend for a moment, then sat down heavily in a chair. "Jesus, Dean, I was about to..." "You were about to tell Sam Giancana to go to hell in front of a room full of witnesses," Dean finished. "And then Sam was going to have you beaten to death, and I was going to have to explain to your kids why their father died over a political argument." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "How did you know what to say?" Dean sat back down at the piano. "Frank, I've been watching you for 20 years. You've got the biggest heart and the worst temper of anyone I know. Most of the time, that works out fine. But tonight, your heart was telling you to defend Jack Kennedy, and your temper was about to get you killed. So what did you do?" "I reminded Sam that you're human," Dean said simply. "And I reminded you that he's human too. Sometimes people just need to be reminded that the person they're angry at is dealing with their own problems." Over the next few days, Dean quietly worked to repair the relationship between Frank and Giancana. He arranged a private meeting where both men could express their concerns without the pressure of an audience. He helped Frank understand Giancana's position, and he helped Giancana understand the impossible situation Frank was in. The crisis passed, but it changed the dynamic of the Rat Pack forever. Frank began to rely more heavily on Dean's judgment, especially in situations that involved complicated relationships or potential conflicts. After that night, Sammy Davis Jr. said years later, Frank started checking with Dean before he said anything that might get him in trouble. Dean became Frank's unofficial crisis manager. The most remarkable thing about Dean's intervention wasn't that he had prevented a fight. It was that he had done it by appealing to both men's humanity rather than trying to intimidate either of them. In a world where problems were usually solved through force or threats, Dean Martin had used empathy and understanding. Frank Sinatra never forgot what Dean had done for him that night. For the rest of their friendship, Frank would defer to Dean in any situation that involved potential conflict or confrontation. "Dean saved my life that night," Frank said in a rare moment of vulnerability. Years later, not just physically, though he probably did that too. "He saved me from becoming someone I didn't want to be. He reminded me that being angry doesn't mean you have to be stupid." The incident also cemented Dean's reputation in Las Vegas as someone who could be trusted by all sides. Word spread that Dean Martin was the guy who could calm situations down, who could find common ground between people who were ready to kill each other. Dean became the diplomat of the Rat Pack, Jerry Lewis observed. He was the one who could talk to mob guys and FBI agents, to studio heads and union leaders, to politicians and performers, and somehow make them all feel like he understood their point of view. But perhaps the most lasting impact of that November night was what it revealed about Dean Martin's character. Behind the cool, detached image was a man who was willing to risk his own safety to protect his friends. When Frank Sinatra needed someone to step between him and disaster, Dean Martin didn't hesitate. The story of Dean saving Frank became legendary in Las Vegas, though the details were usually embellished in the telling. Most versions involved Dean physically fighting off multiple attackers or delivering some impossibly cool one-liner that solved everything. The truth was both more subtle and more impressive. Dean Martin had saved Frank Sinatra's life, not with violence or clever words, but with genuine wisdom and the courage to use it when it mattered most. When Dean Martin died in 1995, Frank Sinatra was too ill to attend the funeral, but he sent a message that was read at the service. "Dean saved my life more than once, but the most important time was when he saved me from myself. That's what real friends do. They don't just stand by you when you're right. They protect you when you're about to be wrong." If this story of friendship and life-saving intervention moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who understands that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step between friends and disaster. Have you ever had to save someone from themselves? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out our other videos about the bonds that define us.